If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
Blah-blah-blah. Sending out good vibes. Blah-blah-blah. Good vibes. Blah-blah-blah. Good vibes. Blah-blah-blah. Good vibes. Good vibes. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that. 108 breaths of deep gratitude and prayers for guidance and protection. And put on a didgeridoo and shamanic drumming track. Shivers or vibrations and stuff like that.
If more of you supported the show, I'd be less sick of podcasts.
That there seemed to be no known explanation for. But to say, oh, well, it's explained by reincarnation, that didn't really help too much. Because what's reincarnation? I mean, these were fragmentary memories.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Grimerica show. We are going to be chatting with Mr. Tom Schroeder a little bit later. A great author about some past lives, some psychedelics, all sorts of fun stuff like that. It's a fun one. This is coming out. This is a holiday app. You're welcome. So, the one and only Graham, Blown Out Chakras Dunlop.
Remember that one? Oh, you wrote your notes? Yeah, that was the didgeridoo.
Oh, that's right. That's you're going to blow out your chakra. Well, that's right. Someone wrote in and said it's the embouchure or something like that.
What is that, the vibration?
That ability to play brass instruments.
Oh, yeah, I have none of that ability.
That's it. No?
No.
You got to practice.
No, I don't want to practice.
No?
I got too much.
You're just giving up the didgeridoo. You could do it while you're driving.
No, I mean, I got it here, and I'll give it to. I'll have somebody play it for me. But
no one should ever play another man's didgeridoo.
Oh, come on, that's not a rule.
Do you know how much slobber is going to go dripping down that thing?
Isn't there a way to clean it out?
No, I don't know. You tell me.
No slobber for me yet.
Have you been playing other people's didgeridoos?
I told you I don't play them.
That's a didgeridoo.
That's pretty good. That's pretty funny.
Someone sent it in.
No.
Yeah. Someone tweeted it.
Oh, okay.
I didn't open the link, but it was like, there's a didgeridoo, and it was like didgeridoo porn. I think someone was using a didgeridoo as a didgeridildo.
Oh, okay.
So,
that's a didgeridoo.
But I wasn't planning on using it. You just walked in.
That was good, yeah. It seemed unplanned, but...
That's right.
No.
I have impeccable timing.
Oh, Jesus.
It's dry, but the timing is impeccable. So what do you got, buddy?
Well, I've been saving up some trip reports, and this is an excellent episode to play some in. Maybe we do get into the psychedelics.
This is not a real-time episode. This is like time machine episode.
Yeah.
This is one of those rare instances where we're recording this intro like a month before you guys hear it.
Yeah. Now, I don't know.
I'm probably fishing, and Graham's probably doing something weird.
I haven't read these. I'm probably trying to stay healthy.
I'll be eating all the fish I catch, so
that's good.
I'll be on a diet of wild-caught fish for a couple of weeks.
And you're fishing in like one of the best places in the world to fish, probably. I mean, my best fishing.
Fish,
I don't fish a lot, but I mean, when I fished up
it's definitely world renowned for freshwater. Graham does not
freshwater fish.
Freshwater fishing for sure. And I actually might run into Mike Bash. I might run and go bash fishing in the freshwater. I might run into, I forget his name, Rince maybe, someone from the chat.
Oh, cool.
Has sent a pic today for me And he's got a cabin right by Kenora on Lake
Are
of
you
the
in
Woods.
Lake of the Woods, right? Yeah.
I'm not on Lake of the Woods. I'm on Red Lake.
Right.
Which is attached
Oh,
to
you're going home
Gulrock Lake,
you're
it's
going
attached to Keg Lake,
Oh,
it's
okay.
attached to all these different lakes.
Okay.
I mean, if you had who knows, you might even be able to get to Lake of the Woods. I'd have to look at a map. They're all sort of connected back home.
Yeah.
There's 10,000 or some odd lakes in Ontario. But I might meet him for lunch or something.
Cool.
Of course, he's in the chat is grimerica.ca/ hangout. If you guys want to get in on the perpetual chat action, Graham and I aren't in there a whole lot. We pop in usually once a day for a little bit. But there is definitely people in there almost all the time, 150 of them. So check that out if you're on the Google scene and you want to go chat with some like-minded people. It's like a little mini Grimerica social media network. Almost.
There's some pretty hilarious conversations in there.
Yeah. You can
And
scroll
cool, too.
through.
Very interesting, too,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So check that out, guys. If you're, I just mentioned that because we have a listener that's like 2 hours from my hometown.
Right on. Speaking of this trip report here is from somebody in the chat. They might not be in there by the time this comes out.
Grimerican Trip Report.
Actually, it's from Garrett. They just sent us the didgeridoo.
That Graham can't play and refuses to
Didgeridoo.
learn.
So he says, hey guys, okay, so when I was 16, there was a drug called DXM. Yeah, I've heard about him talk about this in the chats as well. So I haven't read
In
these
the chats?
in the chat.
You're like George Bush with the internet and the internets.
I haven't read all these, so I don't know if they're positive or negative trip reports. I'm just telling you, this isn't like all healing stuff. I don't know, right? So
No, what's
been
it
a while.
called? When I hear that's an acronym as the drug, I usually don't think there's going to be much healing going on.
So okay, when I was 16 or so, there was a drug called DXM. It's common in cough syrup. So we took caps called quercetin, HBP, mostly DXM, and a little antihistamine. I don't think I've ever heard that. Looking back, I realized how stupid this was, and I don't recommend anyone trying this. It was horrible. I was the lead singer of a death metal band called Kill Devil Hill out of Yuba City, California. The guys and myself took a box each or 32 pills, then smoked some weed and had a few drinks. I'm sure our livers were pretty much maxed out. Anyways, after a nice stint outside watching the stars, we decided to go to my buddy's room, which was a garage conversion. Oh, this is all coming back to me now. Which was a garage conversion that my buddy and I set up with all the bells and whistles. It had black walls, white glow-in-the-dark paint. We painted drips coming down from the ceiling and flames from the ground, as well as spatter on the ceiling to resemble stars, and of course black lights and a strobe, as well as all the appropriate posters. So all 5 of us walk in a single file into the room. I was in front, and it took me a while to find where the light was, and when I did, I said out loud, "There it is," and I saw it. A rat the size of a large cat had filed in with us as if he had gone to SeaWorld. That's what the kids called it when we took DXM, going to SeaWorld.
SeaWorld?
So I said calmly, and there's this rat, and we all turned around and walked single file out of the room. When we spent what seemed like hours throwing CDs, sticks, and whatever else we could find. The rat, which later found out was a possum, just sat in the corner of the room and hissed. At this point, we were tripping so hard we gave up and let the possum have the room, and I went out and laid in the front yard in the back seat of my buddy's car. I have no idea what my buddies did as I was laying there staring up at 2 large evergreens and watched a few crows circle. They began to grow.
Crows or vultures?
Crows.
Waiting for you to...
They began to grow. They grew to the size of large men, and their wings became bat-like, and they continued to circle as I laid there for hours. Eventually, they left, and the hallucinations began to fade. However, the medicine had lasted for 3 days. 2 of my friends and I split from the group and went to my house, and the trip continued. And he says, your digits should be in the mail. Thanks for being so awesome and open-minded. You guys provide a service like no other. Please don't stop. You have opened my mind to things I never thought possible. Thanks, Garrett.
Bingo bango.
Sorry for your crazy... I don't know. That was a pretty Crazy trip report. I don't think I could handle being around a possum when you're high like that. Imagine what are the reasons. Like, here's a scenario for you, right? Do you think that thing would have ever gone in if they were straight? Like, they were probably high to the point where the animal felt like safe or needed to be there or felt it could, right? Like, what are the chances of you guys?
Was it really there? Did anyone go back and check?
Well, yeah, it was there.
Because I've had shared hallucinations before.
You have?
Yeah.
Really? How come this has never been a trip report in Grimerica?
I think it has.
I don't think so.
One of the times I ate acid in BC.
Tell me.
Oh, they're just all watching shit and tripping out on the same stuff. Then some dude started to break dance.
Really?
That was pretty wild too. And then one kid started freaking out, so that was kind of a downer.
Really?
Yeah.
That was your shared hallucination, the breakdancer?
No, it was like we were talking about it because we were watching TV and people's like faces were morphing into weird ways, and we were all kind of pointing it out, and the other person had seen it too, but not very scientific.
Yeah.
We could have been watching the faces morph in opposite directions. Who knows?
Yeah.
You got another one?
Yeah, this is from Pascal. He says,
Wait.
And now another edition of Grimerican Goodies by the people, for the people.
Okay, you're going to save my favorite trip report jingle for the next one then.
What's your favorite trip report jingle?
Yeah, the one with, what's his name?
Chemtrails one?
No, it's the.
Oh, yeah.
Where
is that one?
This is from Pascal. He says, I had the wildest trip ever a few years ago. The last time I was able to trip without fear. I was a normal tripper. I've taken like 8 quarters, half ounces at one time, but this time was different. 2 of my friends came in and started fucking with me and my 2 buddies. I got anxious as hell and freaked out. I got super pissed and walked away to the house. Now in the house, I had my mind rocked like no other times, and this trip was only 2 grams. I felt like I was dying, legitimately dying. I started watching TV and the room filled with smoke, and I laid back and went for the ride. After about 2 minutes of feeling my heart beat through my chest, it stopped and I was floating. I saw little elf hats like geometrical shapes. I felt static throughout my entire body. I felt colors of neon pink, blue, green, yellow. I couldn't even remember my own name, but I was in complete tranquility. And to this day, I feel like that experience was the topper of my life. Previously, I wasn't fearsome of death, and now I see I am. And when I told my buddy, he said I was going to be picked on by the galaxy gnomes. I always wanted to send this trip report in, but never got the time. I might do it voicemail.
Nobody does voicemail. We will pay $8 a month. Should I just cancel the voicemail? It's like $100 a year, and that's real dollars, not Canadian dollars.
That's US, right? No, there's some people in the chats that talking about
in the chats. There's rumors in the chats about using the voicemails.
Yeah. So, but this is a little opposite, right? Isn't it usually previously you were fearful of death and now you're not? This was opposite. After this experience, he was scared to die. And that the machine elves or the galaxy gnomes. So he never said about what I think it was it sounded like psilocybin, but.
Well, that shit goes, that means he has unfinished business.
Does it?
Clear that shit up. I mean, we've all had bad mushroom trips. Absolutely. But, I always tend to come out of them feeling a little bit. I mean, who wants to die? Maybe that's what he needed to hear, Maybe he was a little too loosey-goosey with his life force.
Yeah, maybe. Did I ever read the one, I can't find it. Did I ever read the one about the guys going up into the bedroom and his girlfriend was there or whatever, and they had this super crazy, like, synchronistic trip, and it was really dark, but he died a few years after and all that.
Was that the snake one?
They were in the truck for hours.
I'm not, no.
Oh, man. I got to find that. I think I've lost that one then.
You better dig it up.
They were in the truck for what? No, I think I did read it. They were in the truck, which they thought was like 50 minutes and 5 hours had gone by.
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay, I'll try and dig that up. Okay, so this one's from Terrence.
Psychedelics are catalysts of consciousness.
There's a ditch.
I don't think so. No, it's not a didge.
No, it's not.
Oh, that was electronic.
You'd know the difference, eh?
So this
Even
is
on the business end of a didgeridoo more than once.
this is from France. Cheers from France. This is from Callum. He says,
Cheers from France. Shouldn't it be bonjour?
Salut.
Hello.
Dear
You know
Al-
who taught me how to speak French? A little creepy little pineapple.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, did you guys have ananas?
No.
Tell it français.
We had
Bonjour, hello,
No.
salut.
No.
No?
We had Mrs. De Laurentiis.
Well, we had teachers too, but then we had this just the video they pop in because we probably had a lazy French teacher. Well, no, that was in public school still, so you didn't have a French teacher. It was just one teacher. I guess that
No, we had a French teacher in public school.
we didn't.
Yeah. But it was just, we were the fiesta. We had a fiesta section in the back of the class. It was bad.
A fiesta?
Yeah.
That's Spanish.
I know. Maybe that's why we called it fiesta section. I don't
It's
know.
not a party?
Yeah.
You sure it wasn't siesta for napping?
No, it was like it was a party section in the back.
A party section in the back.
Grade 8.
Sounds wild.
It's bad because I came from Quebec as a kid and I should have known French. I should have learned it. I mean, I did know it as I was young, but I just
be handy nowadays.
resisted when I was a teenager. Okay, before I lose my
Ryan,
voice.
that's his name. Ryan.
You ready? Dear occupants of the igloo. Something's going on.
What's going on?
My voice. Been listening to you for over a year now. Found you while looking for badass Randall Carlson after hearing him on JRE. The podcast is great. Listen to every episode at least a few times. And although I don't agree with all the guests, it's gems like Carlson and you two's rambling that more than make up for it. Darren playing the Graham is All In Believer Chemtrail song is always a thumbs up for me too. Sorry, Graham.
Graham is an all-in believer in chemtrails.
Thought it was time.
See, people must just assume that's scripted. When you can hit it that quick.
And I'm not an all-in believer. That's a funny thing. Partial. I'm on the fence. I think it's happening, but not all over the place. Anyways, let's not go there.
No kidding.
Thought it was time I wrote in and contributed something, so here we go. Last year for me was the year of the mushroom. I'd always wanted to try mushrooms, but put it off as a teenager as I heard horror stories of people mutilating themselves, which looking back, all sounds like bullshit and propaganda in some way. I'm now 26 and have been into conspiracies of all kinds for about a decade. I've kind of tapered off for the past 5 years and focused pretty much on lost civilization and consciousness areas rather than UFOs and 9/11 stuff, as I went too deep down that hole when I was younger. So for quite a long time, I had known about the connection between various psychedelics and ancient cultures, and this prompted me to finally make the effort. From about April 2016, I started taking mushrooms about once a week for a few weeks. Truffles as well, I could no longer stomach them. I started as 1 dried gram and absolutely loved it. I bumped up to 0.5 gram each week until I was consistently doing 5 dried grams. The summer last year was a hot one and I live right on the edge of a forest. I got into the routine of consuming the shrooms and going half naked wander in the forest just as they started coming on. After an hour or two, I would try to leave the forest on top of this hill nearby that overlooked the valley, and I would try to do this at a certain time, just when the sun was coming down. I had done it before by accident, and it was fucking magical. The sun had just gone down, and the sky was oranges and reds, a thin mist creeping in where I was standing, and a couple of our majestic horses were there with me. Combine that with the shrooms, and it created a beautiful moment that I chased every time I did shrooms this summer. Anyway, I had many great trips last year, but this one time after I had been for my walk, I wandered back down to my house and lay down on my sofa. I was looking directly out the window in front of the colors outside, casting light onto the now living psychedelic tapestries of my sofa and walls. What happens next scared the shit out of me. I decided to close my eyes and explore. I call it stretching the third eye because to me, it does have that pleasurable stretching feeling right where the pineal gland is.
Like Pilates.
I got lost there, as I usually do, and the next thing I remember is I was having this sense that I was no longer on my sofa. I could feel it below me, but I could sense I was somewhere else at the same time, somewhere that felt familiar. I had been there before. There was also a presence there, and it communicated in a way that was closer to telepathy than anything else. And then I remembered where I was. Now I call it the waiting room. because that's what it felt like. It was a place I had been there many times before. I remember having the strongest case of deja vu. I can't compare it to anything else I've experienced. I got the feeling the presence had just given or was allowing me something. And then it started. I began to remember things. And I say this for a reason. It was stuff I shouldn't know, that we shouldn't know. I was being blasted with it. It was overcoming me. I started to feel scared and then terror as I was drowning in it. I shouted it for stop, that I didn't want to remember, that I just wanted to put the Jungle Book on and forget it. He puts in brackets, I had planned on watching it later on. Then it was going. The knowledge it had gifted pulled back like a wave, and then it was gone in seconds. I sat up on the sofa and opened my eyes. I remember nothing of what was taught or given to me, only the experience. It felt just as real as it feels typing this right now. The only thing I came away with was a sense, a feeling that I had lived many times before. This exact same life I'm living right now. And that's why it felt like I had been there before. I don't know what to make of this experience, but it was my first powerful experience using the fruit of the gods. Has it put me off shrooming? Hell nah. I'm still using mushrooms once or twice a month, now up to 10 dried grams.
Holy fuck.
They have helped me with a lot.
That shit. We should interview him on 10 dried grams.
They've helped me with a lot, and I could talk about every aspect of the various trips you can have with them all day, but this has been a long report. Sorry about that. Maybe I'll write again sometime with another experience. Now, before I go, to request, Darren, please give me the link to the mushroom episode. And second, at some point, you guys have talked about Ancient Civilization series on YouTube, 6 parts, I think. One of the episodes was about high machining on stones. I watched them all last year, but can't find it anywhere. Any chance you remember what it was called or how to find it?
Ancient Aliens.
No, I don't think that's what he's talking about.
The first season Ancient Aliens is really cool.
No, he says it's about Ancient Civilization series on YouTube, 6 parts. I don't know. I don't remember what that is.
The Ancient Aliens is 6 parts, the first season, and they're like 2 hours long, and it's all the crazy stonework, and I'm sure that's it.
You're talking about the first season of Ancient Aliens?
Yeah.
Huh.
The first and second seasons were pretty legit. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it was all interesting things, and then they went like off the rails.
Yeah. Well, you got to run out of stuff eventually. So, yeah, thanks for the report. I kind of messed it up a bit there, but I mean, I wonder if, people get these downloads, and sometimes it's, through a deep meditation or some sort of contact with other entities. It's like that was happening, right? I wonder how we could get that information down. Like even some of our guests have had that, right?
You have to just have a book all the time and write that shit down instantly.
Like I wonder if he's getting into these other states where he's on 10 Gs or whatever.
And you have to do it instantly too. Because if you don't...
So you think it's not even there? Like it got sort of like an upload or a download, and then now it's gone. He's already uploaded it back. Like he doesn't even have access to it anymore.
That's right.
Because he didn't accept it.
That
maybe
happens
it's
all
like
the time.
he sort
Even
of
with little creative
it,
ideas, I'll think of things that I think are just perfect. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I should try this. And then if I don't write it down, it's like now I've gotten to the point that I'll force myself. It's like, no, I got to record this someplace.
I used to leave myself voicemails.
It's fucking gone. So, okay, get out your pen, because this link will not be in the show notes. But if you email me your email, I'll forward it to you. But it is traffic.libsyn.enter_the_mushroom.mp3.
And that's the only way you can get it.
Or email me.
Don't email Graham, because then I'll just forward it on to Darren. He doesn't read my emails, so you're better off just going directly to Darren.
Yeah, Darren at Grimerica.com. Just the Grams, just the app stuff, though, really. Send all the other stuff to Graham, unless it's a practical joke I can play on Graham. Or I'm in charge of the bloggers, too. Anything technical. Podcasting advice. technical advice. Graham can help you out with the show notes aspects and all the actual
Emotional
researching, emotional. What else you got, buddy?
Oh, I think I got a UFO quote. Another one from the CIA reading room. No, yeah, it is from the CIA reading
We'll
room.
blast that out, and then we can
Wrap her up.
ask for some money and wrap her up.
We kept saying, what is that? What is that? And it wasn't until after the events happened and it disappeared to the south in the darkness that we went inside. We stayed outside for a couple seconds, then we went inside. And she sat on the couch, and I went to the bar, and I sit on a stool, and I took my glasses off, and we stared at each other for 5, 10, 15 minutes, who knows? And I got up, and I wanted to go back outside, and as I grabbed the door, I looked my wife right in the eye, and I said, we just saw our first UFO. And she looked at me back, and she goes, I know.
All right. Thanks, buddy. This is an office memorandum from the United States government. It's to the Assistant Director of Scientific Intelligence, dated 4th of April, 1958, from the Chief Applied Science Division, SI. Again, I got to warn you, it's hard to read these things. The subject is comments on letters dealing with unidentified flying objects. References letter to the Director of CIA from Leon Davidson, dated 11th March 1958, and letter to the Director of CIA from Donald E. Kehoe, Director of National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. Number 1, as a result of the action taken by the IAC on December 4th, 1952, a Scientific Intelligence Advisory Panel was convened in January 1953. The panel consisted of the following scientists. I'm just going to read the last names. Robertson, Alvarez, Berkner, Godsmith, Thornton, Page. What was that? And Thornton, Page. No, and Page. The panel concerned itself with the evaluation of any possible threat to national security by unidentified flying objects. The panel issued a report dated 17th, 1953, and this report was classified secret. The letters from Leon Davidson and Donald Kehoe to the DCI concerned themselves primarily with Edward J. Ruppelt's book on unidentified flying objects. At the time that the scientific panel met, Ruppelt was a captain in the Air Force and attended the panel meetings. His book, however, is concerned with the identification of unidentified flying objects. Ruppelt's statements regarding the mission of the panel are in error. Ed has led the reader to believe the panel's mission was to identify the flying objects and to make recommendations on methods to further identify such objects. This is the basis for the apparent contradictions which arose during the Mike Wallace television interview. This also the basis for Mr. Kehoe's misgivings. In late 57, in late October 57, Major James F. Byron requested a declassified version of the panel report. This office contacted each member of the panel and agreed upon. Declassified version was written and sent to the Assistant Chief of Staff, Intelligence Department of the Air Force on 20th of December 1957. It was a decision of all the panel members and the CIA that while no member of the panel objected to the use of his name in connection with the declassified version, they decided that no connection of the panel members with CIA be disclosed.
Does it say CIA?
Uh-huh.
Pros say CIA, not the CIA.
Oh. Yeah.
Eh?
Yeah.
It's a no agendaism.
Yeah.
Good one.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes.
Bingo bango. Hey guys, check out Grimerica.ca /support if you so see fit. If you can find it in your heart, find it in your wallet. There's a bunch of different options there on how you can keep the show value for value model. You know, if you feel like we're giving you some value with our show, if you can throw some monetary or some non-monetary support back our way, whether that be a monthly subscription, a one-time donation, buying some swag in the store, Grimerica.ca/swag, sending your synchros, your stories, your trip reports to Graham at Grimerica.com. You can be reviewing the show, Grimerica.ca/iTunes, or any place else you so see fit. You can be sharing the show either with your friends or on social media or wherever you see fit. tell your friends, sign people up for the newsletter. That's a great way to tell people about the show without actually having to tell them about the show.
Yep.
Just go to grimerica.ca/news.
You're on Twitter and I'm on
their
Instagram.
Pop in their email and bam, they're just going to get a little Grimerica in their pocket.
Plus, there's I think everybody new that signs up gets a link to the episode from the cabin.
Cabin app, that's right.
Yeah, which we didn't put in our normal feed.
No, that's right. That's a secret app. That's the first actual secret app we've got.
Oh yeah, you wanted to do that one day, didn't you?
We should sneak that whole app behind an app one day, like after the outro music and everything, and see if everyone notices it. See, the problem is with modern technology, you're going to see right away that there's still 2 hours left.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not as easy as it was on a tape, a CD back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh. Anything else?
Well, there might be a way to do it. No, that's it.
All right.
Maybe can you hide the next chapter in your thing? No?
What?
Like the chapter thing, like... You can't hide last chapter.
I don't know.
Forget it.
What you're saying.
I was trying to get around the technology problem with seeing that there's a 2-hour secret app afterwards.
No, I don't think you can do that. I wonder if you added it. Huh. No, I don't think you can do that. Not in the fucking Apple podcast player anyway.
No, for sure.
Get off the Apple native player. Get onto Overcast or iCatcher or something like that. Overcatcher's free. iCatcher's like $2 and you will fucking thank yourself for it.
Because you'll see our art every week, different art.
We have new art every week, and half you fucks don't even know. Okay, guys, enjoy the chat with Mr. Tom Schroeder. It's a fun one.
Tonight we've got Tom Schroeder here. He's an award-winning journalist. He's been editing and writing for nearly 40 years. He's got a new book coming out, The Most Famous Writer Who Ever Lived. We'll probably get into that, but definitely Darren and I want to talk to him about a couple of his previous works. One is The Acid Test, LSD, Ecstasy, and the Power to Heal, and then an older book called Old Souls, Compelling Evidence from Children Who Remember Past Lives. And he's also been an independent editor and an editor to Washington Post magazine. Lots of good stuff. I'm not going to get into the whole bio here. I'd be here for like a half hour. So
also too boring. So.
No, it's good stuff, man. It's really good to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show, Tom.
Sure, I'm enjoying it. Thank you.
How are you? Doing pretty good?
Yeah. I was just watching some baseball.
Oh, nice.
Go Blue Jays.
Yeah, right. No, I live in the DC area, so I'm a Nats fan.
Oh, I see.
DC in the belly of the beast.
Yeah, boy. Big time.
So I guess the book of yours that, of course, stuck out to me right from the beginning is, and I can't remember, I swear I was trying to track you down a couple of years ago, but I wasn't as good at getting in touch with people back then. Is the past lives one, which is, and the reason is because I've got my oldest daughter, when she doesn't do it as much now, but when she was, on the 2 to 3 range, when she had kind of first really learned to articulate herself, she was constantly, talking about, when she used to be my grandma, way back in a couple lifetimes, or she was my mom at one time, she was my grandma at one time, I think we were brother and sister at one time, and then I was kind of reading some stuff on soul entanglement at the time, on how these kind of, these souls, the one look on it is that these souls kind of, reincarnate in different social structures and things like that, so, Yeah, it seems to be a hard subject to find people to talk about these days.
Yeah. Well, had you seen Old Souls at that point?
No, I hadn't. No, I found that when I started looking for more information on it.
Well, because if you've read it now, that's exactly the pattern that these cases follow. And just to give you a little background, and just to catch your listeners up on what Old Souls was about, is that I discovered that the former head of the psychiatry at the University of Virginia was a man named Ian Stevenson.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about his work.
And in the 60s, he became intrigued when he read widely, and not just in psychiatry, but he noticed that he was interested in sort of paranormal type phenomenon, and he was reading, and he realized that around the world there were reports of cases where children, very small children, began to talk about things that sounded like a previous life. And he wrote an essay saying that it would be interesting for a qualified scientist to sort of investigate these cases and to sort of try to determine if there was any evidence that that these people really had previous lives. And so the Society for Psychical Research sort of contacted him and said, "We think that's a great idea. Why don't you do it?" And, here he was, the head of the, Department of Psychiatry at a major university. So, but he decided he was going to do it. And he ended up spending 30 years chasing down thousands of these cases around the world. And in some of them, he actually found evidence that these small children gave details about the lives of people who appeared to be complete strangers to them, who had died before they were born. And that and they gave enough details so that you could determine who the previous person was, that they gave names, they gave locations, names of towns and things like that. And that in some cases, these turned out to be accurate details about people who, for as far as he could figure out, these children had never met, and nobody in their family had ever met them. So that was, it took me like 2 years, because he was shy of publicity, because his goal was to get mainstream scientists to be interested in this. And he didn't want to be dismissed as some kind of flake.
Yeah.
So he thought that publicity and sort of journalists writing about it would only make his scientific colleagues more skeptical. So he was really resistant, but over a couple of years, I persuaded him to trust me, and I went on 2-month-long research trips with him where he was revisiting cases that he'd studied in the past and also looking for some new ones.
Huh. Really interesting. So why were you so open to this? Like, you come from a fairly mainstream background in journalism. Like, there's a lot of people that would just ignore this kind of stuff or ridicule it. I mean, you seem pretty, I don't know, just rational and open to this kind of research.
Because I had done a story about another psychiatrist called Brian Weiss. This is at the time I was the editor of the Sunday magazine in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
And he was at Mount Sinai Hospital in Miami, and he had hypnotized some of his patients and regressed them to what he believed were authentic past lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, in journalism, it's always the unexpected things that sort of get the most attention. And so here you have a respected psychiatrist who was espousing this far out stuff. So that combination intrigued me as a journalist. I thought, well, that's, there's a lot of interest in that. So I went and I interviewed him, and, I I thought that these cases of hypnotic regression, ultimately I thought that they had, no persuasive evidence that these were real, because the whole nature of hypnosis is that you tell people to relax, you tell them to imagine things, and you sort of get in touch with their subconscious maybe, but there was no details in the accounts that these persons gave under hypnosis that you couldn't have learned from reading historical romance novels or from knowing a little history. In other words, there wasn't anything that anybody couldn't have known. And these were adults he was regressing to. So they had a lifetime of experience. So there was nothing very convincing about them. I did a past life hypnotic regression too. Mm-hmm. And, I was just making the stuff up. I mean, I was relaxed and it was sort of like daydreaming.
It's hard to tell the difference sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I didn't have any sense that this was real.
Yeah.
And so, and like I said, none of his cases had people revealing details that were specific to one person and that nobody else could have known. And yet, in my research for this, I came across Stevenson's work, and he was the guy I was interviewing, had become a best-selling author writing books about this stuff. And meanwhile, Stevenson was very little known and obscure. Mm-hmm. And yet I read his case stories, and first of all, he wasn't dealing with hypnosis. He was dealing with spontaneous statements by children, just like your child, exactly like your child, in fact. And he was very carefully going and trying to rule out any ways that the kid could have known some of the details that they revealed. And of course, he was checking them for cases where the details the child spoke later turned out to be true about a real dead person. So I thought, why am I writing about this guy who's basically talking a lot of hooey as far as I was concerned, when there's this other guy who's got some really compelling evidence, and I don't know how to explain it, but I sure would like to know more. So that's how I got into it.
Did that change your view quite a bit about it? Like, obviously your soul.
Well, I went in, I thought I basically wrote a proposal based on that. I sold the book idea.
Yeah.
And I was about to get on a plane to meet him in Paris. We could both go to Beirut, Lebanon together to begin the thing. And I remember sitting in the waiting lounge in Paris before I had met him. And I was just thinking, the worst thing in the world could happen would be if this guy turned out to be a complete flake, and there was obviously nothing to these cases, because what would I write about? But instead, the opposite turned out to be true. These cases were even more compelling than I had thought. And, to talk to these people and see and meet the families and talk to them, you realize that they had nothing to gain by this. They had no interest in becoming celebrities or anything like that. And in fact, in their communities, it wasn't a big deal. They weren't getting anything out of this. They weren't getting any money. And in some cases, in fact, the families really wanted to suppress it. They didn't want to talk about it because either it embarrassed them or it made them feel like their kids were, not loyal to them. And there was a lot of emotional upset about it, and they didn't want to talk about it. It wasn't like they were going for publicity or anything. And yet some of their story, and yet they didn't deny that. For instance, there was one case where a little girl, as soon as she could talk, began to take the phone off the hook in the family's home and dial the number and start shouting into it names. And later when she began to talk better, she'd say, well, that's the name of my daughter. That's the name of my husband. I need to talk to them. And so eventually she gave the name of like 7. What she said was her husband's name and 7 children's name. And she said this town where they lived, which was a few hundred miles away. And so the family was really curious about this, as you could imagine. And so they met somebody from that town that she had been talking about. And they started telling this person all the names their daughter had been giving. And this person said, oh my God, there really is a family with all those names. And the mother of the family died in heart surgery just before your daughter was born.
Wow.
Like a few months before your daughter was born. So that got back to the family of the, Stevenson called it the previous personality. That's the name of, the dead person who matched up to this. And her daughters paid a surprise visit to the house. And the daughters told me that when they walked in, the little girl instantly called them by name and said, the first thing she said was, did your parents give you the jewelry that I wanted you to have? And this sealed it for them, because they knew, and nobody else outside the family knew, that when their mother was dying, she told her uncles that, her brothers rather, that she wanted these girls, her daughters, to have certain specific jewelry of hers.
Wow.
So they, and then since they were a wealthier family than the little girl's family, their family was afraid that the little girl was going to try to get money from them by claiming to be the dead wife of this man. And so they wanted to suppress the whole thing. Plus they did business with people who would have not liked the idea of reincarnation.
Yeah.
So they really actively tried to suppress it. So when we went to talk to them, they didn't want to talk, but the daughters finally came out and said, I can't deny that what this little girl said was true. And she knew things only our mother could have known.
I was actually wondering, does it tend to be that it's lineal like that in most cases, or does it jump around? Do you have cases
what do you
where
mean by lineal?
Well, that one kind of worked out that it was, the birth was kind of right the next step. Is there more cases where it was, say a few hundred years ago, or any historical cases?
That's the really interesting thing, is that the children who he could determine who they were talking about, sometimes kids, like in your case, the child would say something general, and either it was in the same family or maybe it was about somebody they never could identify. So they didn't know who that person was the child was talking about. But in all the cases where you could determine who the child was talking about, they were people who had died in the recent past, in the previous generation.
I wonder how, if it fades and things. It opens up so many different cans of worms. Does it fade over time? Can you only remember the last one?
That was the other thing, was in almost all these cases, the child was sometimes even obsessed with the memories that they were having from the time they could talk. And usually it began to fade around 6 or 7 years old. About the time that children start to socialize more, that was really when it started to fade, when they were getting out of the house. And eventually they would forget about these things altogether and stop talking about them at all. But in cases where enough information was given so that a connection could be made to the previous personality's families, sometimes the previous families accepted the child's claims and developed lifelong relationships with them.
Wow.
And actually sort of acted almost like a second family.
Yeah.
That's crazy. You wonder if there's any blood there somehow. When you hear these, I can't remember what
You mean blood relation?
Yeah. Like I can't remember where I was reading it, but it was that idea that there's these, that it's always, whether it's a group of 50 or 100, and it's like pre-planned in the afterlife. They're all planning it out, and then you just don't get to remember it. It's like a ride.
Well,
it's like
there were many cases where people remembered the lives of, or talked about what seemed like the lives of their relatives, like a grandparent or something, or even like an uncle or an aunt, or those situations. But those, in terms of sort of proving that this was real and not some kind of fantasy on the child's part, that was problematic, because when a child gave information about a grandparent, there were lots of sources of information they could have gotten that from, sort of like photo albums. Their parents might not have remembered talking about details of the grandparent's life, but
they could have. Yeah.
But who could say that they never mentioned it?
Yeah.
So yes, there were a lot of those cases, but he tended not to spend as much time on those for that reason. And he was more interested in cases where children were talking about people who the family had obviously had no contact with and no knowledge of.
Yeah. It's so interesting.
Only because that was more compelling, not because those other family cases weren't possibly exactly the same, but just because you couldn't rule out that the child was saying this stuff because they had heard it or seen it somewhere in their family's albums.
Did it pretty much sell you on reincarnation doing your research?
Well, but what I realized, what I came to believe was that this wasn't the result of fraud or delusion, and that some of these things that there seemed to be no known explanation for. But to say, it's explained by reincarnation, that didn't really help too much, because what's reincarnation? These were fragmentary memories. There was a lot of stuff that these kids didn't remember or didn't know. And how exactly, and there's also, when you're talking about science, you want to have a theory for how things work based on the evidence, okay? So what's the theory? How would these memories pass from a dead person to a child who was born after that person died? And nobody had, and there's no evidence for any mechanism by which this could happen.
Well, they're all out there for sure. There's also the idea that maybe it's non-locality consciousness, and it's just sort of out there in the ether.
Right, exactly. Kind of like radio waves that somehow they tuned into for a reason. So I, to me, ultimately, where I came down was it to me a really brilliant demonstration that we know far less about how the world works than we pretend we do, or than we think we do. And that this was, to me, a huge indication that there's, that Shakespeare quote is, there's more in heaven and earth than is dreamed of in our philosophy, from Hamlet. Well, that's the quote I started the book with. And it really underlined for me that, and I think if you look at the state of modern science, physics, and cosmology, what you get is stuff that is far weirder than reincarnation that the physicists are talking about, like multiple universes and the whole quantum reality is, something that doesn't fit into our common sense view of the world either. Like that electrons are really neither here nor there, but they're this kind of potential position everywhere, and it only takes a real position when you measure it. And it's like, it's not like you don't know where it is. It's like it isn't anywhere, and it's everywhere at the same time. Yeah. All that weird stuff that happens in quantum physics, I think it just shows us that the ultimate nature of reality is far more elusive and mysterious than a lot of people realize or think.
Or it's just a simulation just trying to come up with shit the deeper we look. It's like, holy fuck, what do I do now? Okay, well, here you go. So, figure that out.
So you've read about the whole simulation theory, like that we're all in some kind of computer simulation. And then they present, mathematical evidence that that's not as unlikely as it seems.
No,
so who knows?
The math says it's almost more likely than it's not, I think.
That's right.
Which I kind of have trouble with. I think you can kind of prove anything with math to an extent. But, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to argue with. It's hard to argue with for sure. Especially when you see what we're doing, in 100 years. What we can do with the shit we've got. Like, to think that if someone had 500 years, like if we can go 500 years without blowing ourselves up, who knows what we'll be able to do.
What about 500,000 years
let's start with 500.
Yeah. Right. No, it's really, and also there's other strange stuff that happens, sort of some of these synchronicity moments that seem like, they're almost like scripted or something,
Oh, yeah.
I was listening to, it's Dr. Wargo today, because we're having him on later about his take on synchronicity is that it's more of a non-linear time thing. And it's like...
It's more of a precognition.
It's more of a precog. It's like you're noticing that because it's some little
emotional
moment
residue
that's playing out from some future reward that you're going to get. It's pretty wild stuff. I was going to ask, did you have a favorite case that comes to mind from the book?
Well, I really like the case of the little girl because one of the things, because she had that dramatic thing where the daughters walked in, now grown up, and she instantly recognized them and asked them about the jewelry. But also because when she was little, she was obsessed with the dead woman's husband, who she thought was her husband. And she would call him on the phone, all the time as a little girl. And he kind of believed that she really was his former wife. So he didn't want to stop talking to her. But then eventually he did. And when we went to visit them years later, he said, I asked him why he stopped talking to her, if she stopped calling, and said, I had to tell her to stop because not because I didn't want to talk to her, but for her sake, because he felt that she was sort of clinging to that past life memory and it was preventing her from having a normal childhood and from growing up and falling in love with somebody else. And so very selflessly, he tried to cut it off. And then I said, well, so then you've never heard from her again? And then he very sheepishly said, well, I talked to her a month ago. And the daughters were horrified to hear this. But that she was still, and at this time, the little girl was now 20 years old, a very nice young woman who taught English in Beirut. And she still seemed haunted by it, and she had never married, never really had a serious boyfriend. And I asked her, well, does this have to do with your attachment to the previous life? And she just, sort of shook her head. Yes. She really choked up.
Wow.
So that was a very moving case. And, there were a lot of other interesting cases. I mean, in one case in India, in a farming village, there was a young woman who sort of fell into a trance and they thought she was dead. And, so it was and she seemed to be dead for 5 or 6 minutes. And then when she revived, she began saying, who are these people? And I don't live in this village. And she said she lived in the city, and her language and her ability to write were sort of much more sophisticated than this rural woman who who had passed out and they thought she had died. And so she began telling the story about how that she had lived in the city and that who her father was, and that she had married into this family, and the in-laws hated her and they ended up like hitting her in the head with a brick. And it turned out that there really was a case of a woman who had gone to live with her new in-laws and who had wound up dead after being hit in the head with a brick.
Wow.
And so the father of the dead woman came to the village, had heard about this, and he came to the village, and she recognized him and all that other kind of stuff, where she said stuff that only his daughter could have known, according to him anyway. So that was a really cool case, because it wasn't even about, a child. It was about a woman who sort of woke up in the middle of her life and started talking about somebody else's life. Wow. So that was just very cool.
Yeah, I was going to say how that normally doesn't happen. Like, it's interesting how as adults we need to be regressed to have some sort of vision of our past lives. I mean, I've been through that as well, where I go through a past life regression and I'm somewhere and I see something, but I can't help but think it's just my imagination making something up. But then I'm like, well, then where is this coming from? And maybe it really is a past life. And I'm kind of doing that dance between, am I just making this up, or is there something really there? But yet these kids, as like you said, up to 6 or 7 are still open, or they're just not bombarded with the crap that we have now, that there's still, there's still something there. It's like easier for them. And
also they're not unsure about it. I mean, they are absolutely positive. I mean, they don't even, at that age, at that young age, and even younger than 7, like at 3 and 4,
yeah,
they just blurt it out. Just, like there was an American case where this kid started like drawing pictures of World War II planes and started talking about saying, that he flew a plane like that it got shot down, all this other detailed stuff. And so they take this picture and look at a book of World War II aircraft, and some really obscure plane in there looked exactly like the picture that he drew. And he gave a lot of other details that a little kid really wouldn't have known, obscure details about the history of, this kind of plane. And so, it's really, people who want to dismiss this, if you take a careful look at these cases, it's extremely hard to dismiss it. It's like they seem to be tuning into something.
Yeah, and yet it's ignored by the mainstream. You've got all these other theories out there that we're talking about that, whether it's like some of the quantum stuff or like multi-universe theories, which are still just theories, even dark energy and dark matter, yet you talk about the stuff where there actually is some evidence to look at that at least deserves some more investigation or some acknowledgement.
Yeah, I would think so. I think one of the hard things is it's sort of hard to think of what the next step in this research is, because you can keep accumulating these cases. There are plenty around, but there's always some doubt about, sometimes the details aren't absolutely perfect. They're close or something, but they're not right on, or sometimes there's some extra details that are just flat out wrong. And
then what do you do with those? Yeah.
And how do you go further? Well, one thing that they did was they do psychological tests, they do intelligence testing, they do testing to see if there's any mental illness in kids who are doing that. And the answer is no, that the kids are completely normal. Sometimes they're slightly more intelligent than the average kid. But, who knows if that's just a small sample size or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to think, how do you take this research to the next step? And the real thing that's missing is, as I said, any idea for what, the mechanism is by which these things could be transferred from one individual to another. And, if it has to do with the fact that we're all like in a computer simulation or something, we're nowhere near sort of nailing that down. So, what's the next step? Where do you go from there?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is a tough one. I guess you just throw it in that, there probably is something going on in the afterlife bucket.
In that ignore bucket for a bit. Darren, how old was your daughter when she stopped doing that? Like 5 or 6 or something? She stopped
about a year ago. And she's smarter than she should be.
How old is she now?
She's 5.
Oh, okay. Oh, she's only 5.
Did she ever say any names or anything?
No, she never said any names.
So
what were the statements that she made?
It was always her being, I'd be doing something, whether it be reading her story or rubbing her back or doing something with her, teaching her something, and she'd be like, "Oh yeah, I remember teaching you how to do this when I was your grandma," and it was just like, huh. Then what do you say to that? You just sort of take it in passing.
Oh well, who she was talking about then, though. I guess you had 2 grandmas. Did she ever?
Well, that's the thing is, yeah, I had always thought of it as being way farther back than that. I never even considered to look into the recent, because she's done my mother. Said she was my mom before and my grandma, and my mom is still around. But I mean, I'm not ruling out that both happened for sure. And
yeah, well, see, that's the sort of thing, though. You're hitting on it. You're hitting on exactly the sort of thing that comes up is that, okay, your mom's still alive, so that's obviously wrong, right? And then you think, well, maybe, grandma, mama, maybe it just felt the same. But who knows? I mean, that stuff gets weird.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess for me, I didn't really need to prove it because it's definitely not something that, I was so against that I needed to get to the bottom of it. For me, it's just like, oh, cool, kind of like when I see my UFO, it's just like, huh, there's a UFO.
Well,
that's what everybody's talking about.
When my son was little, he used to say, when I was a daddy, and I dealt with it like a grammar problem, No, it's like when you're going to be a daddy. He goes, no, when I was a daddy. And I just didn't really explore that.
I guess that's how it was for me too. But I knew it was weird at the time. I didn't look at it as a grammatical. I took it as like a past sort of thing. But to me, it wasn't, it wasn't like a game changer. It was just like, huh.
Yeah. Right.
I heard about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can imagine, though, if he had started giving specific names and
then I would have been probably pretty floored. I would have been like, so I would have grabbed a pen. And I remember, too, there was times that I kind of pressed her because I knew there was the possibility of something being there, but she could never really, it was hard. She wasn't obsessed with it for sure because, she didn't want to keep going. She was on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So what's next? What's this new book about, Tom?
Well, it's interesting. It's sort of like talking about being
relatives,
being your grandma, about being relative. My grandfather was a writer too, and he was named McKinley Cantor, and in 1956 he won a Pulitzer Prize for literature for the novel Andersonville, which was about a Civil War prison camp where thousands of Union soldiers died on terrible conditions.
Wow.
And, he's a very larger than life character and very interesting. And I knew him well. He lived on Siesta Key in Sarasota, Florida. And I would, from the time I was a baby, my parents would bring us down for like Christmas vacation, and we'd stay at their house. And then when I was 14, we moved to Sarasota, like a mile from their house on the beach. And so I knew him quite well. He died when I was 23, like 3 days after my first daughter was born. And, and I became a writer, and I'd never, even for a second, considered that maybe he influenced me, oddly. I mean, it just never occurred to me. And in fact, by the time I was in my 20s, he had had fame and fortune in the 50s and early 60s, but he didn't invest the money, and he kept spending like it was rolling in when it wasn't rolling in anymore. And literary taste changed, and he sort of stopped being in favor, and ultimately he's very little remembered now. I mean, it wasn't like Hemingway, who became a household name and stayed that way. He was legitimately a celebrity at one point, but then, by the 70s, he was almost completely forgotten. And he sort of died broke and disappointed. And, and so it wasn't until I was really in my 50s that I began to sort of wonder about that, why I always had my brother and sister and I would always sort of have this attitude that he was overblown, that he was kind of a little bit pompous and thought he was way more famous than he was. And so we didn't really take him seriously, even though he had accomplished this amazing thing. But then when I got in my 50s, I started thinking about him more and more. And just as really, it was just when my mother died that I began really having questions about him and realizing that there was nobody alive on the planet who could answer those questions anymore. Uh-huh. And I think a lot of people get to, the age in their 50s or something when their parents are beginning to get ill or die, that they realize that they're suddenly disconnected from their past and all the stuff that they maybe didn't want to pay attention to when they were young, that they really get curious about. And just at the time where there's nobody to ask. But then I remembered something, that when my grandfather used to write, he and my grandmother would go on these great trips to Europe and stuff, and they'd write these fabulous letters to me. But we always joked that he wasn't really writing the letters to us. He was writing it to the Library of Congress, because after he won the Pulitzer, the Library of Congress said they wanted to collect all his letters and papers. And so he was constantly sending stuff off to the Library of Congress. And I hadn't thought about that in 30 years. And I realized that, I live in the DC area, as I said, and the Library of Congress is just at the end of the metro line that I live on. So how ironic, I thought, that just as I was thinking there was no source of understanding, I realized that he'd left all his papers to the Library of Congress, and in fact, there turned out to be 50,000 documents in storage in the library. So I spent basically a year or 18 months going through all this stuff and sort of following the leads where they led. And it sort of, at the end, I had this unbelievable sort of novel-like story about my grandfather's amazing life and sort of how it affected me. So that was called, I called it the most famous writer who ever lived, because my mom always used to tell us that when she and my uncle were little, that my grandfather had them convinced that he was the most famous writer who ever lived. And, that the theme of sort of attaining, wanting fame and success and being able to attain it and then have it all sort of wash away and to sort of die broke and bitter, that was really interesting to me, because, it's something we all like strive for. And in the end, what is it worth? So I found out all sorts of amazing and surprising things about him that I didn't know.
Wow, that's super interesting. I wonder, did you ever hear of anything from your daughter? Like, your daughter was born 3 days after he passed away. It's interesting. We're just talking about all the past life stuff.
No, she never.
I almost thought that's where you were going.
Did she become a writer?
She's a great writer. Well, and not only that, but his mother, my great grandmother, was the first woman newspaper editor in Iowa history. And my mother wrote a novel. And now my daughter is a really talented writer as well. So,
Wow.
the genetics of it is kind of interesting.
Yeah. What was the thing that surprised you most out of all the stuff that you read? Like, realizing there's a whole other side to his life that you may not have known.
One thing that surprised me was, I had always thought that he and my grandmother, who married when they were in their early 20s, had like the sort of storybook romance up until the end anyway. But, that he always would say how, sort of she was magically preserved by some, that she had found some stream in the mountains of Peru that kept her forever young and that kind of stuff, And they seemed very attached, but it turned out that he had like dozens of affairs, including some serious ones. And I found letters to that effect that really were shocking to me. And the other amazing thing was that his father, who I knew he hated his father, but I didn't know that much about him. But his father turned out to be this amazing con man who actually ended up spending some time in Sing Sing, but was, part of the corrupt political regimes in Chicago and Montreal, and had and I found a 1934 article in the New Yorker describing this charismatic guy who had a pyramid scheme going. And that was my great grandfather.
No way. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Pyramid schemes back in the day were probably easy.
Well, people were very credulous, and he could get in trouble, multiple times and then go somewhere else. And there wasn't like the internet.
That's right.
So he would start all over and do the same sort of crap all over again. And he kept popping up in all these famous scandals.
Just like old man Rockefeller.
Yeah. So that was kind of amazing. And also, it's the very sort of moving stuff about, I didn't realize that he had a drinking problem. But then I found all these letters he wrote about how, he didn't feel like he could write when he wasn't drinking.
Yeah.
So that was really very sad.
Yeah. It's funny how, the great writers and the movie stars and the rock stars and the musicians and the really creative people always seem to have those vices.
Well, that's what he felt like, that he couldn't, that if he didn't have that to look forward to at the end of a day, sort of ripping his guts out at the typewriter, he just couldn't keep the creative juices flowing. But he ended up flat on his back, at in somebody's yard in the middle of Iowa, and had to call my uncle to come pick him up because he had the delirium tremens, so it didn't end in a very good place. And he ended up dying of congestive heart failure, which is a result of long-term alcoholism.
Yeah.
And then, when did that book come out?
That came out in October.
And then in between, you have the book on psychedelics. How did you fall into that one?
Oh, well, basically, I had some psychedelic experiences when I was in college, and they really impressed me as being non-trivial. That I really felt like I had some insights at that point that basically I used my whole life, and that sort of helped me sort of be a better person. And so I was always aware of that. And then, this is a weird story, because when I was in college, I was the editor of the college newspaper, and I was home for spring break in Sarasota when I was like 21 years old. And there was like an article in the local paper about this hippie who was building this fabulous house in the woods by himself. And so I decided, hey, that might be, and he was my age. So I decided, hey, that might be an interesting story, you know, for my college paper. So I went out and found this guy, and he was a really interesting guy, and he had all these wild philosophical things to say. And so then, you know, so I wrote the story. You know, he had a pet wolf that was, you know, out on a chain in the yard while he was building this house. And 10 years later, when I had become editor of the Miami magazine, I saw a story in the Tampa paper about this wild sort of perpetual college student, college dropout, who was saying that ecstasy was was going to solve people's psychiatric problems. And so I sent a reporter to do a story on this guy, you know, called him a Tim Leary for the 80s. And then 15 years after that, I was the editor of the Washington Post magazine. And, I'm leaving out the most important part. This guy was the same guy who was building that house that I had interviewed back when I was in college. I recognized the name. And so then 15 years after that, when I was at the Washington Post, the New York Times ran a story about how Harvard was doing the first study of psychedelic therapy used to treat people for psychiatric problems, in this case, depression for people with terminal cancer. And the institute, and there was a nonprofit institute behind it, funding it. And the head of that institute, the same guy. So that I said, okay, that's it. I'm doing and that combined with my sense that this really was a valuable thing, potentially, said, now I'm going to write this book. I'm going to write this myself. And I wrote a magazine article about it. And then when they started treating combat veterans who had gotten PTSD in Iraq and Afghanistan, I thought this really ought to be a book.
And our listeners will know who that is.
Excuse me?
I think our listeners will know who that is too, that guy.
Rick Doblin?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've had Brad Burge on the show a couple of times.
Oh, yeah. Have you?
Yeah.
So anyway, I met Rick when I was 21 years old just because I happened to be in the same town, and I heard that he was building this weird house in the woods.
With a pet wolf.
And then I kept running into him. And when I called him after I heard about the Harvard study, not only did he remember me, but he had said just that day he had shown both those stories to his board of directors as a kind of indication about how far he'd come in his image, in improving his image from, you know, those days to now when he was doing a study with Harvard.
I'd call that a synchronicity, really.
Yeah, well, it sure felt like it to me.
Or a future reward.
And he was doing a study with a psychiatrist in Charleston, South Carolina. That was where he was testing the use of MDMA, which is ecstasy, in therapy with women who mostly had PTSD as a result of rape or sexual abuse. And over the years, that grew to include combat veterans. Yeah. And so I sort of found one of those people who had been treated, one of the combat veterans who had this horrific experience in Iraq and had PTSD that the VA couldn't do anything to help. And he was on the brink of committing suicide when he found out about that they were doing these studies in Charleston, and he lived like just in a town just north of Charleston. So he got into the study, and it basically cured him. So I have 3 characters in the book that I focus on. I tried to write it kind of like a movie, where, you see the guy in Iraq, and then you also see Rick as a wild kid in New College in Sarasota doing acid every day. And then you see the psychiatrist, Michael Mithofer, his name is, also in college, sort of having an experience with LSD that scared him but intrigued him. And then you kind of follow each of these from their beginnings through until they all connect together in these trials that basically save the combat veterans' life.
Wow. So there's also a darker side to that, the history of the MDMA trials, because there's a lot of good research going on and good news, just like there is with psychedelics and addiction treatment and stuff like that nowadays. Like there's a lot of positives to it, but unfortunately there was a stumble along the way with part of the trials. When they went to some sort of scientific panel, there was the wrong drug was used or something. And you want to talk, because that was like that just shows
amazing. Because it took them. A lot of this book is about how difficult it became to do any research at all. Because what I didn't realize was that ever since LSD was discovered in 1947 accidentally, and Sandoz, the laboratory that Albert Hofmann worked for, sent LSD out to labs and to universities around the world and said, this is a amazingly powerful drug with novel effects. We want you guys to experiment with it and see what it's good for.
Oh, yeah, good. Yeah, we're going to hear about this. Yeah.
Well, very quickly, a lot of people figured out, hey, this is a sort of transformative drug. It can, and they started using it in conjunction with therapy with people with major psychiatric illnesses, and it had tremendous benefit, and it was having huge success. And I think, between like 1950 and the mid 60s, like somebody did a survey of 40,000 patients that had been given this treatment and determined that it had a hugely better success rate than any other form of psychotherapy. And not only that, but that given under controlled conditions with medical supervision, that it was, considering how powerful its effect were, it was remarkably safe. So that was the state in the mid-60s where psychiatry was being revolutionized by these psychedelic drugs. And everybody just thought that the sky was the limit and how useful they were going to be. But at the same time, the CIA was like secretly investigating it, for use as everything from an interrogation drug to a drug that they could give to their agents so that if they got caught, they could take the drug and be useless in interrogations, or maybe even, to put it in the water supply so that an enemy army would be completely disoriented. Anyway, they all sorts of wild stuff that they were thinking of using it for. And so they had things like we're running a whorehouse in San Francisco. And when the Johns came in, they would dose them unsuspectingly with LSD just to see what effect it had when somebody just sort of slipped it in their drink. Doing really irresponsible, horrible stuff that had some really bad consequences. But as a result of that, they were, sort of loosely spreading LSD around and in these studies that they were doing. And so there were a lot of people who sort of got a hold of it. And, it's a very unforgettable experience. So it's got out. The CIA kind of single-handedly created a black market of this drug, and it just caught on, and people started synthesizing it, and you get the whole phenomenon of the acid tests, which the book is named after, in California with Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters, and the Grateful Dead playing at these giant parties where everybody was taking LSD. And it started, being taken all over college campuses. And basically it scared the shit out of the establishment. And there began to be all these really sort of overblown scare stories and all, newspapers and magazines about people who thought they were Superman and jumped off buildings, or they took LSD and they started like indiscriminately attacking and raping people and things like that, which most of which were not sourced. Most of it was hysterical. Most of it was not true. And so they, made it they put it on the Schedule I and made it a highly illegal drug, which of course did very little to shut down the illicit use of the drug, but it completely shut down the
scientific studies,
all research.
Yeah.
And Rick, who was a nobody, sort of inserted himself into the community of serious psychedelic researchers and basically spearheaded this 30-year effort against huge odds and prejudices to get it seriously studied again.
And when was that? What year was that then when it got put on the schedule?
1970. They put it on schedule.
Yeah. Huh.
That's mass.
So anyway, I have like just a few minutes left. If you have any other questions.
No, we're pretty close. I was just curious about the MDMA. I think the thing about the MDMA would be very interesting, just to finish that sort of part off. So there was studies on that, and then when they went into the lab, the kind of
right.
Yeah.
Well, so I was going to say. So anyway, Rick and Michael Mithoefer were in the middle of this. At the end, after about 30 years of trying, they were finally in the stages where they were going to get FDA approval for these studies. And they were trying to get a university to back them on it. And they were about to do that when this government-funded scientist, who was basically paid by the government to find the negative consequences of these drugs. That's what the government was looking for. They weren't looking to study it. They were looking to find reasons to fear it. And so as Rick and Michael were in the middle of getting all these approvals, he came out with a study that says MDMA is way more toxic than we realized. I was giving it to monkeys, and so many of them died that I shut down the research project. So he was saying this is like, not only dangerous, but fatal. And that shut everything down. And then a year later, it turned out that the drugs that he'd been giving these monkeys, the drug that killed him, was mislabeled. It was not MDMA, it was methamphetamine. And he had to do this retraction. And of course, the ironic thing was that methamphetamine, even though it had such negative reaction, was already a prescribed drug. You could get methamphetamine with a prescription, whereas these drugs that were far less harmful, many times less harmful, were still, absolutely prohibited. So anyway, when that happened, they finally were able to start the research that is now at the point where it's been through phase 1 and phase 2. The way these things work is drugs have to go through 3 phases of research, each one more elaborate and more expensive than the last, before it can be approved for medical use. And they're now on the 3rd and final phase, which they estimate will last from 3 to 5 years. At which point, if their results are as good as they have been up until now, it will become a therapy that a psychiatrist can prescribe to his patients.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, and then in the meantime, all this legal over the, prescription stuff is the dangerous stuff that people are dying from, and all the helpful stuff is
opiates and stuff. Yeah, and in fact, one of the really promising uses of psychedelic treatment is to help people who have opioid addictions, which of course is the huge epidemic that's like crushing America right now.
Canada too.
Yeah.
Canada too. Well, even psilocybin seems to be starting to poke its head into the ring with depression treatment. And I mean,
they're using psilocybin for all this stuff, including addiction treatment. Even and MDMA, they're even doing a trial where to help autistic adults improve their ability to socially interact.
Wow.
I mean, and it was psilocybin was phenomenally successful in helping people quit smoking.
Ooh, I wonder if that had something to do with my quitting smoking.
Maybe.
Yeah, good. I mean, a lot of people who sort of have a positive psilocybin experience, sometimes they just feel like their attitude about how they treat their body just changes on a dime.
Yeah.
What they eat, whether they smoke or not.
Yeah. We've had listeners send in stories of exactly that. Like they have.
Well, I do still to this day, at least once a year.
Yeah.
A good wrestle with my subconscious.
Right. Well, and ultimately there are a lot of people who say, well, why should we have to wait until we have a psychiatric illness, mental illness, before we get to experience this? Because it's useful for people in their everyday life.
Maintenance.
Yeah.
So,
I as I said, I had some sort of insights that I used almost every day for the past 40 years.
I agree 100%. Before we let you go, real quick, where can our listeners go to get more Tom Schroeder?
Oh, well, I have a website, tomschroeder.com, and with that sort of has all my books listed. And, you also might be interested. I just Ghost wrote a book that just came out.
That's what I meant to ask you about. Yeah.
Called The Operator.
Yeah.
And it's I wrote it for the guy who killed Osama bin Laden, the SEAL Team 6 member who put 3 bullets in Osama's head. And it's all about his like 14-year career as a Navy SEAL and the 400 combat missions that he went on before he did bin Laden mission. So that's pretty exciting because it was like the first week out, it was like number 4 on the New York Times bestseller nonfiction hardcover list. So that was fun. And it was really interesting to write that. And if I say so myself, it's a pretty quick read.
I'll have to check that out. Is that the one that passed away now?
Do you mean the Navy?
The SEAL?
No. He's very much alive.
Didn't a couple of them end up dying?
Not in that raid, no. But SEALs in recent times, there have been a few Navy SEALs who've been killed in action. Yeah, that's been in the news over the past year.
Did he mention why they threw him overboard, or?
Well, I mean, the body was in pretty bad shape after they were done with it. But I think that they didn't want to make it a rallying point for terrorists. So they just wanted it to be over with as quickly as possible. I think that was the idea.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a bunch, Tom.
Sure. Enjoyed talking to you guys.
Yeah, that flew by real fast. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay. Take care, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.
That was a chat with Tom Schroeder.
Yeah, very interesting. Life. Lots of reading. Lots of writing. Oh my God. Like, yeah, check out his bio. He's all kinds of books, edited all kinds of books.
Ghost writing.
Yeah.
Writing, ghost writing.
So I guess I was going to ask about Osama. Yeah.
Osama.
Yeah. Because I thought he died like way before, but I didn't want to get into too conspiratorial deep waters with him.
Right at the very end.
Yeah.
Oh, big thanks to Tom for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for making these shows possible. Commercial free, ad free, paywall free, bullshit free, other than Graham's bullshit. Check out Grimerica.ch/support, guys, for all the different monthly options on how you can help us stay that way. Do a one-time donation. Do all the shit in the show notes.
Yeah, you can check out the tags too. They if you're not getting a good enough description of the show in the show notes, the tags kind of give you an idea. Well, they do. They give you an idea of what we talk about in here.
So do the show notes. Do everything in the show notes on the list and check out Graham's tags. All right, guys. I think that's about it. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Psychic spies from China try to steal your mind's elation, and little girls from Sweden dream of silver screen quotation. And if you want these kind of dreams, it's Californication. It's the edge of the world in all of Western civilization. The sun may rise in the east, at least it's settled in a final location. It's understood that Hollywood sells Californication. They are surgeon very well to break the spell of aging. To level the skin, is this your chin or is that why you're waging? Firstborn unicorn, hardcore softcore. A teenage bride with a baby inside, getting high on information. And buy me a star on the boulevard, it's Californication. Space may be the final frontier, but it's made in a Hollywood basement. In Cobain, can you hear the sphere singing songs off station to station? And Alderon's not far away, it's Californication. They are surgeon very well to break the spell of aging. Skin, is this your chin or is that why you're waging? Firstborn unicorn, hardcore softcore. Dream of Californication. Dream of Californication. Dream of Californication.
conspiracies and high paranoia. Here comes another show for ya. They're the kings of Grimerica. They're the kings of Grimerica. Everybody listen to Darren and Graham.
If they make you laugh, if they make you cry, if they blow your mind, why not go online to grimerica.ca/support?